Hey, welcome to Rock Paper Hand Grenades. I'm Gary Hopper, the representative from the big city of Ware. Tonight we have my producer Johhny B. Goode, who's has what you got 6 years?
Yeah, six.
6 years
Yeah,
of
6
being
years.
free and clear of heroin.
No, for me. Oh, I thought you were saying 6 years I've been here. No, 8 years. 8 years.
8 years. Okay, 8 years. And my favorite son, Sean, is here with us today. And he's here because he actually knows what he's talking about when it comes to drug addiction, which is something I don't think we can lay claim to, other than our own personal experience.
Yeah, personal experience, but no professional.
Yeah, so he actually understands what's going on. So first, I wanted to get something off, tell you what's going on with the show. We were canceled for 2 weeks, and I will tell you what I know. I know that when this show started, it was started by Mike Egan, and Cheryl Mayer had the Mayer report, and and Cheryl passed away, unfortunately, and so Mike asked me to continue the show. That went on for years, and Matt Connerton was my co-host for most of those years, until one day we had Dan and Carol McGuire on. And Dan was speculating that the heroin epidemic was closely related or may have been facilitated by Medicare expansion, which was ridiculous because anybody who knew more about it would say, well, it started way before then. But anyway, one of the people who also has a show here, John Hopwood, got very, very upset at that comment and called in and complained. And then the following day, I was told that my producer has to be there every week. At that time, it was Mike Egan, and Mike couldn't do it. He would come in once in a while and bring banana bread, which is really good. But he couldn't do every week. And so we got Steve. What's Steve's last? How do you say Steve's? Gott. Okay, because it's spelled weird. So we had Steve in for a while, and then he had some conflicts with his daughter, I think, had some school stuff, and he couldn't make it every Wednesday. So Johhny here stepped up to the plate and said he'd be the producer, because the producer has to be somebody from Manchester to do a show.
Yep.
So that was going along good, except you had some car trouble, so you didn't show up for a while.
I currently own 10 vehicles, and only one of them is working. It's been a great year for vehicles, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so Johhny wasn't able to show up for a little while, and nobody seemed to make much about it until I went on vacation, and I don't know, some other stuff happened in the studio that I really actually don't really know what happened. I got an email about the fact that Johhny wasn't here, but I didn't see it because I was on vacation. I got back and then came into, before I do the show, sometimes I go and do Matt Connerton's radio show with him. And when I was down on that show, again, John Hopwood was on, and I said, and I still stand by it, we were talking about the Kavanaugh hearings, and I stated that I was absolutely convinced that the Democrats themselves did not believe Dr. Ford's testimony, and that the reason they waited till the end was because her testimony was not credible enough, and so they used it at the end when there would be very, very little time to actually counteract it. So it would do as much damage as they could, because if they really believed it, they would have done investigation quietly, and they would have taken him out by his knees right off the bat. But they didn't do that. They waited till afterwards, after all the testimony, at the end, then threw her at the press and everything else to try to scuttle the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. That was my argument. Still stand by it. Still think I'm right. But anyway, John Hopwood got really, really upset. And Eric made some joke, because he came in the middle of the argument and made some joke that probably wasn't a good idea. And John got really, really mad and threatened to shut down the show. And then the next day, I was told the show shut down for 2 weeks. And it's very obvious to me from talking to people in leadership here that they don't even want us here. So the reason we're canceled for 2 weeks is because Johhny couldn't show up for a while. there's two different things going on at the same time. I really don't know what's going on inside people's heads, but that's what I know. So if you guys really want the show to keep going on, you should call the station, not during the show, but after hours, and say, hey, you guys we like the show, we want it to stay on. And if John Hopwood says he believes in freedom of speech, he does, as long as you agree with him. That's it. That's all I'm talking about. That I don't want this to be about that. Okay, so 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Now, the reason I wanted to do the show tonight is because we have a lot of people in the city of Manchester, and I'm not talking to the addicts specifically, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the parents of addicts. Because they're the ones, as much as the addict is suffering, it's self-inflicted suffering. But the parents, who you raise them up from they're little and tiny and they're really cute, and the next thing you know, they jump off this cliff into the abyss of addiction, and it's brutal. So I was hoping Sean my favorite son, could explain a little bit about what's going on chemically inside of an addict's head.
Okay. So you want
why? In other words,
how did the wiring get so mixed up that they were making the choices they were making? Why are they stealing?
You have to be a little bit. You have to be a little bit closer. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So the way people learn, and this is all of us, is through neural networking, right? We build new neural networks. When you were very little, at some point or another, your mom praised you for saying mama, right? And so that encourages that behavior, right? And so all of that encouragement or discouragement is by and large, this is a bit of a stretch, but is at least in large part due to neurotransmitters, right? And so you have a pathway within your brain that is designed for encouraging behaviors. You can call it the pleasure circuitry or the reward system or whatever you want to call it. It's focused in different parts of the brain, but that probably doesn't really matter. In any case, so when you beat a level in a video game, or when you get your license for the first time, or if you get a good grade, or all these different things, or if you eat food that you like, right? Or you finally kiss the girl that you've been thinking about for so... All these different things feed into a pleasure system that rewards the behavior, right?
Right.
And as a rule, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
All organisms use a similar function, or at least most higher organisms. So if you picture so what happens is that then when you think of the memory, the neural networks are pathways to that pleasure circuitry.
Yep.
And so if you imagine like a little pathway through the woods, right? And so that pathway is bringing you to a certain destination. When you do drugs, like it was heroin, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a whole bunch of others before that, but
Yeah.
that was just kind of the tail end of it. It was the last thing on the checklist.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
Your bucket list.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
right.
wanted to get it all out of the way young.
That's fair.
There was a method to the madness.
Yeah, just madness.
Yeah.
And then, incidentally, I think that's true for the vast majority of drug addicts, that it's the drug of choice is more. The actual
Exactly.
specific drug is kind of secondary. But in any case, so when you do whatever drug it is, it sort of hijacks that system in a very literal way, and it gives you such a rewarding experience that's, in terms of neurotransmitters, almost infinitely higher doses of that reward than kissing a girl, or your mom saying I love you, or anything else. And so it sort of hijacks that system. So if you picture the path in the woods, all of a sudden somebody comes and bulldozes an entirely new path, right? And so what happens is that the new path gets so clear, so readily available, and it's so inviting that the old paths that you used to go to for reward or for happiness, for joy, for peace, that pathway, if I'm sticking with the same metaphor, starts to get overgrown, right? And you just continue to use that same sort of bulldozed path. And so basically what it ends up doing is it almost sets up, and this goes to, I guess, the point of the question, which was why people who are addicted tend to do things that break their mom's hearts and hurt the people around them and stuff. And that's because there's almost a new personality being formed, sort of a second version of themselves, the addicted version of themselves, the disease, right? And so that disease almost takes on a life of its own, because it's got its own neural networking, its own route to the pleasure system, and it's powerful, it's fast, it's aggressive, it's persistent. And so a mom can say, I love my child, right? And this baffles a lot of people. She can say, I love my child, and still do drugs knowing that she's going to have her child taken away. And it's easy for people to look at that and say that the mom doesn't love the child. But that's not the case. It's that there's like this Jekyll and Hyde thing going on, and there's this sort of second person that, like, again, in a very literal way that you can map the neurons, is being has been sort of created within the mom. And so the real self, the true self, so to speak, probably does love that child more than anything in the world. But the addicted self, the diseased self, it's powerful. It's incredibly powerful, and it sort of overtakes the true self.
Okay.
So there you go. There's a long-winded answer for you.
No, that's what I
No,
want
that
to
makes
know.
a lot of sense. Like neuroplasticity, you've retrained the brain to find that pleasure that you would normally get as a reward for doing something versus, something that's rewarding, like you said, like kissing a girl or finishing your homework, getting that grade. And then you found that it's kind of like a cheat code in a video game. You know what I mean? Okay, well,
Cheat code.
it really kind of is. Like drugs are basically cheat codes.
No, I'm laughing because it was.
So like you want to be invincible? Okay, smoke a little PCP, and you know what I mean. You want to. So then it's that same kind of idea of like, okay, well, this is the feeling I've been looking for like someone like me. The reason heroin appealed originally for years and years, it was I'm never gonna be that guy. Just that's not my thing. You know what I mean? Crack, meth, heroin. I'm all good with those. PCP, no thanks. Incidentally, you end up, when you do drugs, you end up trying these things accidentally, not knowing, thinking you're eating something else.
Hey,
but,
I got to ask you. So,
yeah.
is trying accidentally
Mm-hmm.
is to most people is going to sound stupid, but I get it.
Yep.
It's like because
you go to buy Molly and it turns out to be meth. You think you're eating, you go to
Well,
get
no, I was thinking-
25% of the Molly in New Hampshire is meth.
Oh yeah, no, I would venture to say way more
now
than
they're putting
that. I would
fentanyl on
venture to say way more than that, because the thing is that all of these people. So, from my experience, what had happened was originally you started to see little bits of heroin coming about when this whole revitalize the West Side thing happened, and it was originally just you'd have to go down to Lawrence. You knew if somebody was going to Lawrence, if someone was going to Lowell, anything like that. You knew what they were going there to get. It was some kind of powder, whether it was white or brown. You were going down there to get it.
yeah,
Then all of a sudden,
you're not supposed to tap the table.
then all of a sudden, when we moved in over there on the West Side, about 7 years ago, 6 years ago, the guy next to me was like apparently like the biggest meth dealer in New Hampshire, and then a meth lab blew up across the street. But we used to see, like, I had cut out a lot of old friends when I got clean and everything. It's kind of what you have to do. It sucks, and I love those people to death, and my heart goes out to them. But 10 years later, they're still doing the same things, and I'm kind of not that upset that I cut them out. But I would see a bunch of them when I'd pull up to my house. They'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I live here." And they're like, "Here?" And I'm like, "No, here." And they're like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You know what you're here for. You know where you're going."
Right.
And but then everybody got so into meth, all of a sudden people started figuring out that they could cook it under the bridge if they wanted. You know what I mean? You get a plastic bottle and a pan and a few things from the grocery store. You know what I mean? And apparently you can cook it right up like that. So then from there, people started figuring out that Molly is basically super hyper refined meth. And so they were like, okay, well, so how do we do this? And then you got people getting, I think it's called sassafras oil. I don't know the exact. There's something, everybody's always talking about sassafras. And I think what these people are doing is they're literally taking like the oil and just mixing it with meth and kind of like shake and bake. I think is what they call it. And then all of a sudden they're like, "It's Molly, trust me." And like, I can honestly say, like, back when it first started coming around, I was still, I was off of heroin, but I was still messing with a few things here and there. You know what I mean? Parties, go to raves or whatever, and okay, yeah, there's some Molly. Like, yeah, sure, it's not heroin, But a few times, all of a sudden, I would be speeding out of my mind, and it's not supposed to be like that. You're supposed to be nice and relaxed. It was originally an antidepressant, so I mean, you take it in higher doses, it's like, it's like taking a Valium. You just kind of want to relax, and everything's melty, and it's a great time and whatever. Melty. Yeah, and I mean, horrible for your brain. It's melty because your brain is melting, but I mean, a little less so than meth. So, okay. But now all of a sudden you got all of this. So eventually it got to the point where we stopped taking it entirely about 6 years ago and started buying test kits. In all honesty, and I test for free for people. I'm like, hey, listen, if I'm at a party and whatever. If I'm at a party or whatever, and I'm having a few beers and whatever, and there's stuff going around or whatever. I typically don't go to those types of parties.
What's a test kit? What do you mean test kit?
They sell. I want to say it's. I can't remember the name of the company. It's Trip Safe or something like that. Trip Safe, but yeah, you can look right online. They're called Regent tests. And if you know what you're looking at and you test the stuff, there's different reactions that happen. It gives you a little book, tells you exactly like little tufts of smoke. That's dextromethorphan, the cough syrup stuff.
Right.
If it turns red, it's meth. If it turns purple, it's Molly. If it turns yellow, it's methadone or mephedrone or one of those research chemicals.
If it's got heroin in it?
Oh yeah. That'll tell you all the way down. They sell full-on test kits. Oh yeah, they sell. I mean, and it's. I can't remember what it's called. It's like Test Safe or Rave Safe or Dance Safe.
Rave Safe, wow.
Yeah, it's legitimately like originally they were illegal, and it was kind of like looked at like, oh, if you order one of those, you're on a watch list, and now people are just kind of like, no, trust me, order them. Like, it makes sense. They're cheap enough. There's no reason to be. If you want to party safe. Don't be taking stuff that you have no idea what it is, especially now. See, the difference here is when I was a heroin addict, it was heroin. And I mean, and don't get me wrong, like I went all the way down to Lawrence. I got it from a guy who he had been brought into the country at 6 years old. Told bring this. He was Dominican. He was told bring this bag down to the store and bring this bag they give you back. And when he got old enough to ask what was in the bags, they were like, "This is white. This is brown. You need to sell it." And he's been doing that ever since. He never had taken it. Nothing. He'd smoked weed his whole life and drank beers. That was all he's allowed to do. Always had really good Afghan tan. I would hear about people doing like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bags a day, and I'm like, how? What do you mean? Like, we had to do, we would get a half a gram, and it would last 4 of us all day. It was, so I didn't understand what people were talking about. And then all of a sudden, people started ODing up here. They started dying. For a while, it wasn't the fentanyl that was killing people. It was everybody cutting stuff. And they cut it with vitamin B, and you can't. Resolidifies in your vein and you just get a clog. It's awful. That's how Todd Matthew died. Rest in peace. He and so it got a little ridiculous with that, and then all of a sudden a buddy of mine I knew he was selling it, and we had still loose contact and whatever, because every once in a while I would ask him if he could get me some weed, my back pain or whatever or anything. Well, one day I was laid up for like 3 days. Couldn't get out of bed, anything. So I called him up and I was like, listen, I know you sell heroin. I really don't want anything to do with it, but I am like at my wit's end here. I was like, if I give you some capsules with catnip and white sage in it, both of which are natural muscle relaxants, I was like, would you be able to take like half a gram and split it into 20 pills? And he's like, you realize that's like a granule in each? And I'm like, yeah, well, I've been hearing things about, you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to get high. I know it won't take much. If it's real pure heroin and like, I expect that's what you probably get. I know it won't take much. Well, I took one of those things, and I was like more messed up than I ever was shooting it. And I mean, granted, there's a big gap in the sobriety, but if there's one thing I've learned, it doesn't matter how long you've gone, you still have somewhat of a tolerance just because you have the mind capacity. The first time you do anything, it's always way more pleasurable because you're not used to it. You haven't experienced it. That first experience, just like anything, is always the best, and then you're always kind of chasing that dragon.
Like chocolate ice cream.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man, chocolate ice cream. Anyway, hey, I'm just saying, chocolate ice cream, chocolate, and all of that. That was what helped me with the actual withdrawals, especially. So when I actually got clean, I had gone 4 days without it, and I knew that was the point when I would get sick. Males tend to they can go longer. Females, there's a lot more going on with their ovaries and everything, and like they get like period cramps when they're sick.
Yeah.
Us, we just get hot, cold, hot, cold. You know what I mean? You twitch a bit. You do crave the needle itself, not even just the drug, just the needle. That
Really?
act of doing. Oh yeah. I mean, well, you got to figure when it pierces you, there's an endorphin rush. Your body reacts to that because
It knows it's about to get something.
not just that, but it knows that. I mean, there's just
Pavlovian.
that initial pain. It's the same thing with somebody cutting. You know what I mean? That you get that endorphin rush of like, oh, I'm hurting, something's wrong, I'm bleeding. Send stuff to make it not hurt, and send stuff to make
Oh.
it better. So a lot happens, and it's the same thing. I mean, countless times you'll hear about heroin addicts who are out who've shot just water or shot alcohol. Yeah, we used to hear about girls doing that back in the late 90s, early 2000s. They'd inject alcohol to avoid the calories. Well,
What?
yeah, it was like a whole thing out in Texas for a while. Skinny girls, but apparently they were injecting it into their butt. That's completely different than mainlining it. And
Right.
my wife she comes from a medical background. I remember years after I was talking to somebody and I was like, "Oh yeah, do you ever shoot booze?" And they were like, "Well, yeah." And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, E&J." And she was like, she was just like, "I'm just thinking about it's not how that works." She's like, "It's like putting blood into alcohol. It just bursts it." And she's like, "So same thing, but in reverse." And yeah, it was kind of it snaps you awake to like, wow. The one thing I've always told people is there's a different world with shooting. I mean, once you switch over to the needle, it's not just a matter of like, okay, well, I'm using a needle. It's what else can I put in there? Can I put cocaine in there? Oh, hey, yeah, I can. What do you know? And then all of a sudden you're having a heart attack because you're used to having that low, 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 and your heart's barely beating to let's go a zillion miles an hour. And it's an up and down, up and down. But what helped me to get off after those 4 days, I went to McLean's. They offered me Suboxone, and I took it that first day, and I was high. I was absolutely high, out of my tree, like almost throwing up so high. And I was like, I'm not taking that anymore. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm not. Something's wrong here. And I started doing research there.
Do you think they were just basically taking some? Because this is how I see it a lot, not completely. But I see it a lot like you got the people who are addicted to drugs on the street, and the drug companies say, hey, wait a second, let me get a piece of this.
Exactly. Well, and the thing that's scary about Suboxone, Subutex, and all, well, Subutex, I guess, doesn't have the blocker in it or whatever, which is the dangerous part, but heroin, you can do as much as you want, and if you don't die, when you're getting clean, like, you're going to wish you were dead. You're going to feel like you're dying, but you're going to push through. You're going to make it.
Right.
On Suboxone, if you go, 4 days without it after being on an 8 milligram dose for 2 months, your brain doesn't know what to do. It shuts down. People die from that. Like, just completely, the body goes into shock because it doesn't know what to do. So it basically puts you into like dopamine or serotonin shock. It's dopamine in this case, but it's like you hear about people eating too much ecstasy and they go into serotonin, like they're so depleted on serotonin that they go into serotonin shock. It's the same thing with the dopamine. So and I have a friend, she's been clean, I think a year younger than me, and she's trying to she's down to the point where she's past the quarter of a pill mark. She takes she shaves off a little bit of it and just sticks it on her tongue to the point where she has a scale specifically for it that she weighs out so that she knows exactly how many milligrams or micrograms at this point. But she's like, I literally just can't stop taking that little bit because it won't let me off.
Wow.
And it's taken her 5 years to come down off it, going from
Suboxone?
Mm-hmm. So that's my whole thing. Is if I have any advice to anybody, it's do it cold turkey. It sucks, but after about a week and a half, it's all a mental game. And like you were saying, in the thing that helped me. There's a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know?
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about neuroplasticity and about how, for instance, if you consistently get angry over the stupid little thing, I dropped my sunglasses and my shoe was untied and all of that, you're building that up. Whereas if you consistently take the time to be like, wait a minute, I realize that I'm in this cycle that I've built up because of those neural pathways, the more you reinforce it, the more the wires build into there. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that I used to grow up hearing, well, that's just the way he is. That's just the way he was raised. That's just the way he is, or whatever. To different people in my family and whatnot. Like, well, why is he being like that? Well, that's just kind of how he was raised, or that's just how he is, and it's unacceptable. Because the fact of the matter is that everybody can change everything. You can absolutely. I get that you're hardwired to do certain things, but and I mean this goes for certain mental illnesses as well. I have depression. Which is why heroin worked for me. I had never known. The first time I smoked weed, it was like, oh. Wait a minute. Is this what normal people feel like? Like, I wasn't even high. I was just, I wasn't, I mean, don't get me wrong. Later, about 20 minutes later, I was very high. But originally, it was like, whoa. I don't feel everything screaming right now. I don't feel like I'm in mental angst. I just kind of feel calm and at peace.
Is that true, Sean, that, like you said, first time you get high, you build this pathway. But the inclination to get high to begin with, isn't it typical for most people who become addicts to have a certain amount of either anxiety brought on by post-traumatic stress or some sort of anxiety?
There's usually some kind of root point that's causing it. I mean, I can be completely honest with you. I've met plenty of people who have no mental issues and have never gotten into drugs. And I mean, the few people that I know that don't have it or didn't have mental issues beforehand, as soon as they started using, they poked their head out and it was like, oh, maybe these were present before and you just didn't realize. So I think a lot of it is that people have, I mean, especially like in a city like this, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great city and all, but there's like a certain Manchester lifestyle that people become accustomed to. And you go other places and you tell people like, well, this is what I grew up, with, and they're like, what do you mean? Like, how old were you? And you're like, I don't know, 8 years old. And so they're like, that's horrible. And, it doesn't occur to us because we're so desensitized to it because that's what we grew up around. I mean, yeah. I can remember being 12 years old and finding my first heroin needle on the street and being upset, being like, what? This is in my city? Never having known, you know what I mean? Oh, yeah, of course. It's been here the whole time since at least the 70s.
Yeah.
So I feel like...
I was trying to bring him into the conversation, too.
Sorry. It's all right. It doesn't make any difference to me. I'll listen to you.
Yeah. I mean, he knows me. I'll talk for 3 hours without taking a breath.
But anyway, is there a correlation between childhood stress and addiction, or?
Simple answer, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I mean, he mentioned PTSD. So it's hard to distinguish between. So there's a far higher percentage of people with trauma backgrounds that develop substance use disorder than in the typical population. It's not representative of the typical population. That said, it can be hard to distinguish between did the trauma in the childhood cause a substance use disorder, or is that correlation versus causation, right? So we tend to produce children like ourselves, right? And people that are more likely to create trauma for a child are also more likely to be alcoholic, to be substance abusers, etc. And so, is it directly related to trauma? Probably to some degree, for sure. But there's also the correlation between the genetics being passed down and what types of mental illnesses the parents may have had, right, that caused them or encourage them to do things that were traumatizing too. But in general, yeah, I mean, you mentioned dopamine and serotonin and those types of things. And you mentioned having depression. I mean, if you're, like you said, if you feel like you're depressed or anxious, I mean, in the substance use community, the amount of them that have anxiety is through the roof. It's way beyond anything you would find in the typical population. And I mean an anxiety disorder. I don't mean just like general, I get nervous, like I was nervous coming here or whatever. But like more serious anxiety. And so if you feel like that your whole life, you may not even know that there's something wrong. And all of a sudden you find your grandma's Percocet or whatever the heck it is. Sorry, I don't know what I can say, but I can't say.
I don't know.
Whatever it is, and you take your grandma's Percocet or you smoke pot with your buddy at his house or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden that anxiety you felt your whole life just sort of dissipates, right? And there's plenty of people that can smoke pot in college, never have it become an issue. There's plenty of people that can take pain medication regularly and never have it become an issue. Substance use disorder definitely has a genetic component because there's a percentage of it that we just are born with. Even like prior to ever touching a drug, there are typically some sort of emotional anguish that drug covers up, and that's what separates the person who takes pain medication and needs and really can't wait till the next time they do it, and the person who takes pain medication feels sick to their stomach and wishes they didn't have to take it.
Right.
I feel like a lot of it too is this whole starting kids off on meds young. My gateway drug wasn't really pot. That wasn't the first thing I did. I actually 10 years old. My sister was a year and a half older than me, and a year and a few months realistically. And she was a budding 11-year-old who wanted to be 16 and had all of the Jump and Teen magazine and all of that and everything. And one of the things that I read, happened to be in the bathroom one day. I picked it up and it said something about Ritalin on it, and I was like, I take that. So I'm 9-10 years old, and I'm looking at this thing, and it says oh yeah, well my classmate smashed up and snorted a Ritalin. What does that mean? And da da da. And I was like, what does that mean? Give that a shot. And so I went and tried it, and I was like, this works way better than when I take it orally, and it doesn't make me sick to my stomach. Why doesn't everybody do this? And eventually, I'm sitting there doing that on my desk, and they're like, you can't. You can't do that. Don't do that. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah, and then that's when I first learned about, this is apparently a drug. And I'm like, I knew it was like a drug, like medicine, but this is a drug. You've been feeding me drugs? And then it was kind of all just...
You know what's interesting to me about that story, too, that I think is... So, you talked about you were 9 or 10 when you knew your buddy crushed up a Ritalin and snorted it, so you did it, too. I mean, that type of risk-taking behavior is also super common for people that end up using drugs, and
that's that impulsivity.
Yeah, and I think maybe for some, maybe it's true for you, because the average 9 or 10-year-old finds out somebody sniffed Ritalin isn't probably gonna try it, right?
Right,
But I'm wondering for you, do you think was there other I can jump off this thing, or other sort of risk-taking behavior?
Oh yeah,
when you were
absolutely. I mean, I didn't up until probably 24. In all honesty, I didn't have any. I didn't learn to control that impulsivity. My favorite story of my impulsivity is I was around 17. I was living in a car with a girl. She was going to college, back and forth. We were living outside a sober house in Lawrence, and she was in the sober house. I was in the car. She was in her college at Fitchburg. She had just gotten enrolled and everything, and I was sitting in the parking garage, and I'm listening, flipping through the channels and whatnot, and I heard it was kind of like jazz station, and I'm like, ooh, what is that? I couldn't get it to come in, so I'm messing with my antenna and whatever, and I figured out it must have been coming from inside the school, because when I put my antenna all the way down, suddenly I could hear it clear as day. So I'm listening, jamming out, and we leave, and we get on the highway later, and she's driving, and she's like, I can't figure out why my radio's not working, and I'm like, oh, I know why. So without thinking about it, I popped my seatbelt off, opened the window, I climbed out the roof of the window, had my feet hooked in the door and my waist on the top of the roof, and I leaned over the car doing 65 miles an hour down the highway, and I pulled the antenna out, and the radio worked fine, and she's screaming at me from in there oh my God, what are you doing? And I get back in, and I'm looking at her just seriously in panic, telling me I could have died, and I'm like, what are you talking about? It wasn't that big a deal. And it's that type of thing. It just didn't occur to me until 24. At 24, all of a sudden I woke up one day and
Wait a second. This body only lasts once.
Yeah, it does. You could have fooled me.
Yeah.
Could have fooled me when I was younger. Well, that, and I think so. A lot of it too was the reason I originally got into drugs was I never wanted to be one of those parents that was just wagging their finger at the kid like drugs are bad, and that's what Fox News told me, and you're gonna be a bad person if you do drugs. And especially because like my whole life I was told like, oh, you take one hit of pot because your dad was all into drugs, and that whole side of the family is all into drugs. Which turns out, don't get me wrong, we got some alcoholics, we've had some people who loved their cocaine, but the '80s were a hell of a time for everybody. So that being said, a lot of what I was told by the outskirts of my family wasn't true. So I went, 14 years old, some kid in class was talking about weed, I went and tried it, and it was like, I just feel like this is what normal people should feel like. And I felt lied to, and I was like, well, now I'm going to figure out what else they lied to me about, you know what I mean? Like, maybe this is the key, is that if you do all these drugs, you'll actually be successful, and it's just a matter of figuring out your dosing like how doctors do. Yeah, well, no. Not so much. Not so much. So my whole plan was I dedicated 10 years to doing everything I could get.
You dedicated 10 years.
Absolutely, from 14 to 24.
For trying to do better living through chemistry.
Basically, yeah. I mean, legitimately, that was me. Like, I'm just going to mash this up in here, and I'm going to press that.
The thing is if you look at, okay, so you have a kid, like Sean said, that are, the majority of them are prone to anxiety, right? So they do. The first time they do drugs, like what you just said, is very, very true, and it's a completely it's a problem we have. Is that we tell kids? I know that was the truth. And when I was in school, is well, if you try pot, you're absolutely going to try this, and the next thing you know, you're going to be jumping out of a building. And then you see your friends, and they try pot, and they're just giggling and eating Twinkies. Yeah. So you go, wait a second. There's a disconnect between the reality and what you're told.
Yep.
But the problem is once you start doing drugs, you start doing things you regret. Mm-hmm. And I think it exacerbates the anxiety. In other words, it builds it up. So now before you were maybe just anxious, or maybe had a trauma that happened in your childhood, and now you're creating more trauma in your life. So you need more and more to just to try to put that under wraps.
Yep, no, it's very true.
Have you, when you're dealing with people in recovery, is it a lot of them have done things that they're...
Every one of them.
Every single one of them.
Everybody.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever met.
I mean, some more severe than others, but for sure, yeah, every one of them's done things.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of recovery, is working through that crap, and whether it's telling a counselor, or whether it's doing your fourth and fifth step, or whatever it is for that individual, working through, because it's one thing to work through trauma that was done to you, right, and to accept that as a child. It wasn't my responsibility. It's another thing to know that you traumatized someone, right? And,
or yourself.
Yeah, the abuse to yourself, and the that degree of regret is in almost every single person I met that earnestly tried to get sober. But sometimes they'll cover it up with pointing the finger, but at some point, if they're going to stay sober long term, that only lasts so long before they have to come to grips with the fact that, yes, I did this terrible thing, or whatever, No,
it's true. It's true. I wouldn't have been able to stay away from it enough if there was a point after 2 years of sobriety. I had my everything under my belt. Everything was good. Then all of a sudden we became homeless, and those are the times when you really get tested. And through no fault of our own. I mean, we had been paying our bills, but nobody had ever seen us paying the bills. And at the time, I was 2 years off heroin, but I was still doing. I always did to get off every single drug I've ever done. I've done a doubling system, a reward system, if you will. I go a day without using, and then I have to go 2 days, and then I have to go 4 days, and then 8 days, and each time I can use. But the further away you get it, and you ebb, you can't just. You have to kind of still do around what you used to, but you have to kind of estimate, because the thing is you hit that point where you've gone 30 days, and then you try to do the same amount you did. It's scary. But it puts it in perspective for me it did. It put it in perspective of like, this is how bad it was. This is what I was doing on a daily basis to myself 2 or 3 times a day, not just this once. So so at the time I was actually still on my...
That doesn't seem like anybody that I know of ever recommended as a way to
I
quit.
wouldn't. I would not recommend it. In all honesty, I wouldn't. I really wouldn't because A, it's a real good way to die. No joke. Like that is, I OD'd on cocaine after my 1 month. My mom, well, and I mean, to be fair, yeah, it's a whole long story, but suffice to say, I OD'd, ended up doing a full gram of pure, which was just not, I thought they were both going to be messed up and cut and whatever, and nope. And I had already missed on a few, so like there was just a lot in me, and if it weren't for the fact that the other 2 people that were shooting, we had like this apartment we called the shooting gallery, and yeah, that was like the first 6 months I'd gotten off heroin. I was still living with them trying to get out. Then I met my wife Rochelle, started being back around, people started trusting me again. I'd never stolen from any of my friends. I got blamed for taking a gun that they eventually later found the kid and figured out who it was and whatever, but for years, like you were saying, the original point here is that until you accept, that you caused someone trauma, for years I justified, I was like, well, I never stole from anybody, except my mom, but that's different. Mm. And it wasn't, well, and a lot of that too was my rationalization of like, I went through trauma when I was younger, and a lot of it could have been avoided. And don't get me wrong, like now that I'm older, I realize like my mom she really did do the best she could. Given the crap situation she was given, 2 kids, father walked out, other dude comes in, tries to help. I'm horrible to the guy. Absolutely, like, you're not my real dad kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, like exactly. Like, so the fact that me and him didn't get along and it was a bit traumatizing for me and whatnot, him and I worked through it and whatever. We're all on good terms now because it's kind of like, I don't want to live the rest of my life with that.
Right.
You know what I mean? That was a huge part of the drug thing, was like, it was kind of that rebellious stage hit, and I was like, well, I'm going to get back at them. I'll show them. I'll do a bunch of drugs, and it'll, you know what I mean? And then I was stealing from them, and it was rationalized by, oh, well, it's your own fault. I wouldn't be this way if it wasn't for the way, if this and this and this happened, and eventually you just kind of got to get over yourself.
Yeah.
And just stop making excuses, I have a buddy I've been trying to get help for like a year and a half. At this point, I've helped about 30 to 40 people get clean and stay clean through support groups, or just telling them, sitting there and being awake, 2 o'clock in the morning, you need somebody, you know what I mean, you're freaking out right now, come over, we'll hang out, we'll figure something out, but just for today, that whole thing, you know what I mean, just today, just don't, just come and see me just for today.
Yeah, I had a young kid that I was trying to help out, right? And I knew that if I could get him away from everybody, he'd be good. So I took him up to Littleton, because I knew if we're on the road to Littleton, there's no way he can connect.
Yep.
I also told him, get rid of your cell phone. Throw the cell phone in the damn river.
Yeah.
Because it makes it too quick. If you've got a teenager that's on drugs and they have a cell phone, it takes about 2 seconds to dial in and get something else. So, anyway, and I told him that. I says, that cell phone's going to kill you. Yep. But I took him up to Littleton, and we hung out, and I ate candy, and he was really uncomfortable and sick, and I thought that was pretty funny.
I love you, Gary.
Well, I mean, I could feel bad for him, but it seemed like more humorous than that. But then the next day, he goes, I call him up and says, come on, let's go do something. Well, I'm really sick. I'm just going to sleep. I says, dude, we really should do something. No, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm just going to sleep. Haven't seen him since. I keep waiting for to hear see his name in the obituaries.
I keep getting a message every 6 months or so being like, hey, man, I just wanted to reach out. I'm doing real good now. Da-da-da. Like, I know I slipped up, but it was because of because of this person doing this to me. So that was what happened. It wasn't really my fault. It just, and I'm just...
Wow.
I love the dude to death. I really want to help him. I really want to help his brother when he gets out of prison, but apparently I've been told by a lot of people to just stay far away from him due to the details of whatever happened beforehand, and just as much as I want, my heart goes out to them. Love the dude to death. I wouldn't know half of the people and some of my best friends in Manchester if it weren't for this kid, but I just keep hearing about, it's always somebody else's fault. It's always some situation or something.
And there's in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a promises, and one of the promises says rarely have, and they didn't even want to use the word rarely, by the way. When it was originally written, it was supposed to be, it was going to be like never have, I think it was never have we ever seen anybody fail to get the program if they do what we tell, basically if they do follow our program, they always get it.
Yep.
Was basically the promise. So what's the difference between now when you'll hear statistics that only 5% or 10% of the people that go into AA get it. That's because only 5 or 10% are actually doing it.
That's very true.
That's like saying that only 5% can pass a math test when only 5% actually try to pass the math test.
Yep.
If they're not really getting into it and actually doing it, they can't get it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of it too is there's been a huge, like you were saying. Actually, this was a couple of years ago on the show. You were saying that there's been a huge rise of people just without religion. They don't necessarily consider themselves atheists, but they're devout of religion. They don't do it. They don't mess with it. And one of the things that you said to me that kind of stuck with me was if there's no reason for all of it, if it just means nothing, it's kind of discouraging.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know what I mean? Like, why would you want to live? Why wouldn't you just go and become a heroin addict and all of that? Mm. And that definitely stuck with me when you said that because
I said something right?
You did for once. I mean, good job.
Oh, man.
Hey, it's got to happen, million to one.
Odds are.
But but that actually did stick with me because for me, AA never worked for me because of that whole you have to give the power to someone else.
Right.
And it wasn't until I realized that, and I understand that, but my whole thing, and the reason when I actually did it and it did work for me, was that I decided that I was going to be my higher power. I decided that I am in myself. I was doing a lot of reading on quantum physics and everything, and I realized that there is divine in all of us and everything. So while I still look for help when I know that I'm weak and I know that I can't continue, whether it be through God or through someone nearby. Either way, it's that old joke of the I sent you the boat and the helicopter. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
If you've got the tools around you, use them. It doesn't matter where they came from. It doesn't matter if it's God. It doesn't matter if it's Allah. It doesn't matter if it's whatever. As long as you're using the tools that are right there in front of you, I think that's the real true thing. And and I'll say this, the 12-step system, there's parts of it I disagree with, but on the whole and in general, I think that it works. I really do. And mainly because I've seen it. I've seen it for years and years and years, and not just for alcoholics, I've seen it for drug addicts. I've seen it for people. And a lot of it, there's very key points, like the needing to go and make amends. You know what I mean? Like going and actually saying, whether it's to yourself or to the person that you wronged. You know what I mean? That ability to just go and eat crow and be like, hey, I'm humbled, I'm sorry. Whether you're saying it to him or not.
Because what it does, as soon as you do that pounds of anxiety that you have sitting with you all the time, it dissipates. Sean, we only got like 5 minutes. You have, I want you to speak to the mom who has a kid that's addicted or the kid that's addicted. What do they, we only got 5 minutes. Where do they go? What do they do? What should the mother do for their kid, and what should for the kid do for themselves, and so solve all the alcohol and drug problems in the city in 5 minutes.
Okay. Well,
no pressure though.
They're two dramatically different questions. The mom should figure out how to come to peace. I would strongly recommend a support group. Or at least if you can't do a support group or that's too hokey to go to something like Al-Anon or whatever, that you would at least find another mom or another friend, somebody that you can talk in internet form, sure, just something that you can talk to, because the reality of it is you cannot change them. That's the simplest answer. You can love them to death, and then the other thing to be careful of too is if you're giving someone a place to stay who's actively using in your basement or wherever, enabling, right? Like that's a very real thing, and it is sometimes what can seem like love can be hurting someone, and so I would say to parents of children like that, hold on to hope, but learn how to let it go. Learn how to accept that this may just be how they are. And at least for now.
Jeez, Gary.
Oh, man.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing my mom ever did was she put a no contact in effect for a year, and that. So I definitely agree with you on that. In the same right that what may feel like love can actually be hurting. In the same way, when you walk away and you cut that tie and stop the enabling, it hurts, but you may actually be helping.
Sure. In terms of the person using, what do you want me to say to that? Like, where do they go?
Where do they? What should they do? Where do they go? We got yeah.
You can go any number of places. You know, there's hope for recovery. I know people have complaints about them recently, but go over there and talk to somebody. The biggest thing, you know, AAA, NA, any kind of residential facility, Farnham's 2 feet down the road. I mean, if you're in Manchester, there's so many places you can go. Go somewhere where find somebody who's either in the recovery field or has some like the sobriety, put your hand out and ask for help. That's the bottom line. There's a million different places you can go, and I could promote this one or that one, but I'm not going to do that. The reality is, you know, we were talking about rarely have you seen a person fail. Rarely have I seen a person fail who was able to humble himself enough to do the work, right? To truly put their all into recovery. Because, you know, if you spend all your time using for however many years, right? That's all your time is using or finding it, who's got it, or selling it so you can get more. Like, they spend all their time living that way. You can't just go from that to, like, passively going to a couple meetings a week. That's just not the way it works. No. You have to, like, really get out there and make recovery. I like to say that
you got to go as hard for the recovery as you did for the drugs.
Yep, and just like when you woke up and your eyes open and you started finding numbers, right? The same way your disease isn't going to wait for you to have your coffee, right? Like, it's there, it's ready. Every single day, work it. Start working it. Put your hand out there.
So
there's a million resources, source lists online or anywhere else.
That's
even
it.
Just
good enough?
That's good. That's good. I just wanted to say, because we talked about this offline too, is that as much as drug addiction and alcoholism, it's kind of the same thing, different layers of the same problem. We know it as a physical addiction in that they physically hurt when they're trying to get off it. An alcoholic can actually die from withdrawals. That's part of it. The mental part of it, we were talking about the what you call neural pathways. Yeah. Okay, that's part of it. We have to start rerouting feelings towards positive solutions instead of doing drugs to remedy them. But the other part of this, and to me, it's one of the biggest ones that nobody talks about. It's the spiritual angle, and I will tell you that spiritually, there is a devil, and he wants you dead. If you're a drug addict, he owns you right now. You know, there is a God that loves you right now. You got to decide whose hands you're going to rest yourself in. Hey, have a good night.